Hi everyone, this is a short screencast for CIMA E1 covering BPP Mixed Bank 1. And this first MCQ question that we come across, 14.1, sort of asks us to establish, or how we establish whether or not an organization should be classified as a business and really where we should look. Okay, we're given several options here. I've chosen the right answer as primary objective, and really the reason that I've done that is that the primary objective of the business is going to be very, very specific. And we should be aware of the fact that businesses, generally speaking, should have as their primary objective profit, some sort of profit motive. So really, primary objective was the key one there. The other ones here, we should know that certainly mission is quite a broad issue. Really, from mission, as we're probably aware, mission is really a purpose, or perhaps as Mintzberg refers to, a function of some kind. So it may well be that we could look at mission, but it may not be specific enough. We're familiar, of course, with vision, that being a sort of preferred future. So again, that may well not be specific enough either. And secondary objective tends to follow on from a primary objective. So it's only really by looking at the primary objective of the business we can really get a feel for whether or not that entity is profit orientated. And in that way, we should really be looking at primary objective because it's a very, very specific area. Okay. 14.2 just really covers that area of corporate governance, MCQ style questions, and we're asked to establish what would be a problem with the role of a NED, a non-executive director. Okay, now we should be familiar with NEDs. What are they going to do? They're going to bring some form of expertise or perhaps independence to this role, and they'll certainly form part of a number of committees, not least the audit committee. Now, in terms of issues or problems, really, what we've got to make sure with a NED is that they do have enough time to devote to the role. It may well be because of their expertise or experience that they may have several other directorships. So really having enough time to devote to the role is very, very important. Okay. Now these other areas, external stakeholder security, objective viewpoint, and dual nature, really they're sort of upsides of having NEDs operating within your company. And certainly, stakeholder security would be enhanced by having NEDs on your boards. They certainly bring a non-biased or unbiased viewpoint and objective viewpoint, and obviously they are sort of dual nature, but that's not a problem. That's an upside for sure. Okay, so the answer there is time available to devote to the role. This one here caused a few problems in the class, really in terms of what this meant, sort of understating results. And we should be really clear on the fact that if we're understating results, we're making them a lot worse than they actually are. I mean, perhaps the normal way that you would look at sort of fraud, I guess, in terms of financial results is that companies may try to overstate them rather than understate. So, watch out for these sort of twists and turns in the questions. The answer for me is restricted access to loan finance. Why? Well, because if the results are worse than they actually are, in other words, if we're underplaying our performance, really our chances of being able to get credit out in the market from a bank or another source are going to be restricted. So certainly that is the answer. We'll have less chance to obtain finance because our results are poor. Okay. Now certainly the other A, C, and D, the other angles here, really would be the reverse. In other words, if we were overstating our results, we'd certainly be making excessive distributions of profits to shareholders because they'd expect it. They'd say that you've done well, now distribute the profit. Okay. In terms of unrealistic expectations, of course, that would follow with overstating our results. The financial markets would expect things going forward to be even better than they are if we're overstating results. And this one here caused a few problems in class, this shortfalls in working capital. Really, if we're saying that our results are understated, then we're sort of underestimating, as it were, our requirements going forward in terms of working capital. Okay, so really the answer being B, loan finance. The others are the result of perhaps overstating. Okay, next question here for us just covers the area of e-trading. Do read these questions carefully. Just a twist of a word or a change from not to most likely or the reverse can change the answer. So just watch out for the wording of the question. This clearly says, which is most likely, to lead to an organization accessing a larger market. And really, when you look at these areas here, perhaps the only one that you might have gone for is penetration marketing. I'll come back to that in a second. Certainly, EDI is just a linking of systems, let's say between customers and suppliers. That's not necessarily going to lead to a larger market. We're just talking about the supply chain there and how individual companies or organizations are linked to each other. Teleworking, we should really know that's simply sort of remote working and working by the use of IT, perhaps working from home. Okay, nothing to do with accessing a larger market there. This one here, penetration marketing, we're sort of really saying that we're in a market and we're sort of, going further into it. But what the question specifically asked for is most likely to lead to access to a larger market. Well, with penetration marketing, the market isn't going to get larger through penetrating marketing. The market is the market. Now, e-trading, what does that mean? Well, really, we're saying that we're going to be trading globally, worldwide. We're opening up the business to trading online, and obviously that gives us a massive market. Okay, so C is the answer in this case. 14.5, this idea of change within E1 is important. It's an inclusion of a topic, i.e. change management, etc., that was only previously in E3. So I would expect this to be examined, certainly in the MCQs and perhaps also in the case study. So do get familiar with that chapter on change. It's also been introduced at E2 as well. Okay, so what does Lewin say? Well, really he likens change to a situation where there is a stage process that needs to be applied to ensure that change goes well. Change is difficult to manage, and what Lewin suggests is that you should really break things up into 3 stages, and really that first stage is the unfreezing. So that's where we're trying to sort of sell in the change, educate the workforce, and communicate the benefits of the change. Once we've done that, we move into the change mode, as it were, where we're actually making the change. So we're moving from one state to the other. And in fact reinforcing the change, and then some more reinforcement takes place at the refreezing stage, and there we're really trying to consolidate the change. We're trying to make sure that we embed it in the organization. So the final stage is certainly the refreezing stage. That's part B there. That's the answer. Unbundling, I've never really heard of that. Support and facilitation, I think they're talking about sort of perhaps Cotter and Schlesinger or something like that in relation to the management of resistance to change. But let's be familiar with those 3 stages: unfreeze, change or move, and refreeze. Okay, so the answer B there. Okay, next one, reckon long. That's an important little model. Do have a look at that in your studies. Certainly it refers to supply and purchasing, and this whole area of purchasing supply really centers around the fact that really, sort of contemporary thought or thought in recent years would suggest that we need to make purchasing or supply a strategic function. A strategic function where we're sort of, as it were, getting into bed with our suppliers. We're getting closer with our suppliers, and we're really thinking about supply and purchasing in a strategic sense. So A is the answer there. Okay. Next one, 14.7. This really refers to something called Theory Z, as you'll see, but really this theorist Uchi. A little bit old now, sort of goes back quite a few years, but really what Uchi referred to was this idea that, the way that management approach managing in America, Theory A, and in Japan, Theory J, it is completely different. And really what he said was that, the American management or American management teams needed to move to what he called a Theory Z, which was just a sort of a move towards the way that the Japanese management operate, the way that Japanese firms do business. And to a large extent, that's about cooperation participation, and not really a sort of an us and them type approach. So what we need to know for this question is, what is Theory Z? And it's certainly the application of Japanese managerial practice into Western culture. Okay, do bear in mind it's quite sort of old hat now, but we've got to be familiar with these theories and all of these theories for our exams. So certainly Theory Z, nothing to do with McGregor. He talked about X and Y in terms of management view of employees, whether or not they're lazy and not interested in work under Theory X, or whether or not they're actually highly motivated, interested in work, and really want to move themselves forward. So that's X and Y. Don't get confused with Uchi's Theory A and Z, and obviously, A and J, and obviously Z being where Americans need to move to. Okay. Next one here is just this idea of demographic basis and segmentation. So we're really talking about marketing. A little bit of a tricky one because sort of difficult to see which is the odd one out at first glance. I think what we need to remember is that for demographic basis, we are talking about things like obviously gender, age, and indeed sex. And family life cycle stage would be included as a demographic base. Education would not be, and really what we need to know there is that education would be seen as a sort of a segmental base in its own right, so not under that heading of demographics. Okay, so just think family life cycle, gender, age, and sex, etc. For demographic basis, the answer in this case is D. Okay. Moving on from that, another little question here on marketing, and what they've asked us to do is sort of link in sort of social media to marketing, and not too bad of a question. I think the mistake that students might have made is sort of mixing up these two. Now, certainly viral marketing is associated with social media networks or social networks, things like YouTube and Facebook, and just sort of think about sort of a particular video, whatever, sort of growing exponentially as a result of being passed on from person to person through social networks. Now, the difference between that and guerrilla marketing is really that guerrilla marketing specifically refers to some sort of unusual sort of shock type tactics that people will use. Now, it may well be that this message through guerrilla marketing is spread through existing social networks, but in the first instance, it's the shock tactics that are important. So that's what distinguishes the two. Now, in terms of these other areas, experiential marketing, really we're talking about some sort of experience, some sort of emotional connection. So in other words, what the marketers are really doing is trying to tie the individual in some way through into the brand, into the product, through some sort of perhaps evening out or some sort of event, so that they associate the product with some emotional issue. In other words, they had a great time in a new bar that was promoting a great beer, so they'll associate a great time with that beer. So that's what experiential marketing means. Cause marketing is really where sort of companies, not-for-profit and profit-orientated companies, sort of combine together for some sort of mutual benefit, or indeed mutual cause, and this whole combination benefits both the NFP and the for-profit organization. So B is the answer in that case. Last one here, expectancy theory of motivation. We should be familiar with Hertzberg's two-factor theory, hygiene and motivation they're actually referred to here. We should perhaps also be a little bit familiar with Maslow, that idea of that triangle, and sort of moving up it from physiological needs all the way up to sort of self-actualization, etc., and self-esteem. Really what Broom was talking about is just this idea that motivation is a combination of two factors. Really, valence, which is essentially the individual's sort of preference for a particular outcome or association with a particular outcome, and indeed expectation is the degree to which the individual thinks that if they work towards the goal, they'll achieve it. So really what we're saying is if we multiply one by the other, we get the level of motivation for that individual. Okay, so the other factors weren't relevant. It's certainly valence is relevant in this case, so A. Okay. That's about it for this one. More to upload shortly. Hope this was helpful and good luck in your exams.